He rode into the desert like a man who had nowhere left to go. The sun had burned him down to lines and grit. His hat cast shadow over eyes that had learned not to trust light. Dust clung to his coat and horse, clung to the quiet that trailed him into the small town. An assortment of leaning boards, a crooked saloon, a sheriff's office more suggestion than building. The place looked half forgotten and half expected, as if both town and traveler were pausing to decide whether to keep living or to crumble into sand. Inside the saloon, a piano thinned out a tune and the usual gossip folded into the corners. But something about the air tightened when he walked in. People watched him not out of curiosity, but with the nervous attention reserved for things that could hurt you. He sat at the bar, ordered a drink in a voice worn smooth by too many miles, and felt the weight of 100 eyes. Then he felt one more, sharp, private, like a hand laid on a closed wound. She sat in the far corner, half swallowed by shadow. At first he simply registered the woman's presence. Young, tight features softened by threads of exhaustion, black hair braided with beads and feathers that winked in the lamplight. Then the light caught the skin at the edge of her dress and the small circle of scarred flesh that made his chest clench. He knew that mark. He reached for his glass and found the world tilting. The brand was a jagged circle, not the neat impression of a tool, but the imprint of an old, deliberate violence. Something made to claim, to carve meaning into living flesh. The sudden memory of his own scar, hidden beneath his shirt, a secret he had bled for and tried to forget, rose like smoke. He had worn that brand for years, a private compass pointing back to a life he had fled. Seeing it on her body felt like a summons. She looked at him then, and there was no surprise in the way she held his gaze, only recognition and a small unreadable smile that didn't reach her eyes. When he crossed the room and sat, he kept his voice low because a low voice carries little farther than a secret. "Mind if I sit? If you're brave enough," she said. Up close the burn was more than a bruise. Scar tissue pooled and darkened the skin, the edges ragged and old. He nodded toward it. "Where'd you get it?" "Same place you did," she said, and the sentence landed between them like a loaded bullet. He thought he had outrun things. He'd learned how to move without leaving much behind. But the brand was a looped rope slipping back around his neck. When the saloon doors banged and 3 men in dust-gray coats pushed in, the room snapped tight like a drawn wire. Their boots sang on wood, and their smiles had the clean cruelty of men who thought themselves owed something. "You'll come with us," said the tallest, a man whose face was a road of scars. "Sheriff says you belong in custody." The drifter's hand drifted toward the revolver, under his coat before he remembered he hadn't planned to fight anyone tonight. He told himself he wasn't the kind of man who dragged old sins into the street. Then he saw her fingers go for the knife at her boot, and felt a sliding, inexorable certainty that the brand had turned them both into prey. When violence cut loose, it did so all at once. A single shot rang, the glass behind the bar exploding like a held-back scream. Men dove and cursed. The woman's blade was a flash of cold metal. The drifter's body moved without consulting the past that tried to drag him under. A string of shots. A farmer's stool sent skittering, a broken bottle that glittered like a small, insignificant comet. They ran, not because the drifter was brave, but because there were things you only survive by moving faster than the men who want you dead. They made it to the stables and rode into the night with torches like angry stars burning the edge of their retreat. The town shrank and then disappeared into dunes. The moon rose indifferent and white, painting the land in the flat palette of stolen breath and tense silence. Only when they slowed to a trot did they stop pretending this was anything but being hunted. "You talk," the drifter ordered, the desert taking his words and returning them in a hollow echo. "Now." She stared at him for a long moment, like someone considering whether to hand a loaded secret into another person's hands. "You don't understand what's on your skin," she finally said. "They call it the fire circle. Not a brand for punishment, at least not only that. A map, a key. They mark those chosen to guard it, to carry it, so the secret can't be taken by men who only think with gun barrels." He felt his hands go cold. He had learned some names in the dark: initiation, family, belonging. He had fled before the ink of loyalty could dry. He left with the brand and the memory and a bleeding hole where trust used to be. He had not known it was a map, much less that another half of that map might be alive and breathing with him in the saddle. "You left," she said, as if finishing the sentence he couldn't bring himself to say. I left, he repeated. He unbuttoned his coat to show her the matching scar, the twin to the one on her chest. She watched him as if he was a page she had read before but had misremembered. Two halves, she whispered. That's why they hunt you both. Together you make something men will kill for. They had no time to argue the physics of a legend. Shadowed shapes rose from the dunes like a slow wave. The hunters had found them. Guns cracked. A bullet punched warmth into the drifter's side. He tasted blood in the sand under him as they fought for footing between moonlight and panic. They were outnumbered, outaimed, outplanned. Yet something changed in the bad shape of his chest. The brand flared, not with ordinary pain, but with a bright, terrible energy, as if some old signal had been struck. The air shuddered. The sand beneath their boots trembled with a sound like a beast waking, a low, resonant pulse that came up from some deep place. The woman's face was pale and feral at the same time as she pressed her palm to the burned circle on her chest. She looked as if the brand itself was an answered prayer and a curse simultaneously. She was shaking, not from exertion but from something older moving through her bones. Flame answered them. It did not come from torches or dropped oil but from the sand itself. A ring of fire crawled up in a precise, perfect circle around them, licking the night with a thirst that made the hunters pause. Torches guttered. Men stepped back. The fire was not fire as they knew it. It burned without smoke, with the uncanny intent of an old thing reasserting its will. Fire circle, someone breathed. One of the hunters, a man who had once believed in lights and lies and now only believed in the small human thing of running away. The drifter could have taken advantage of them. He had always been good at taking advantage and leaving before attachments hardened into chains. But as the flames sang and shadow figures rose and then were gone, he felt no triumph. It was a doorway opening, and he knew that opening doors often let in both angels and monsters. In the quiet after the fire settled back into the sand, the hunters fled, their shouts swallowed by the vastness. Only the sound of their own breathing and the tiny tick of a dying lantern remained. The woman sank to her knees, hands clamped on the mark as though she could press it back into sleep. He looked at the brand that now glowed faintly in the moonlight and felt with the clarity of desert air that his life was no longer his. This map, he said, what does it lead to? The woman's laugh was a torn thing. That's what everyone wants to know. Power, treasure, a weapon. Men name it what they fear most. My elder said it was a way to something older than greed, a well of things that don't belong to single men. That's why they carved the map into skin. That's why they marked us guardians who cannot be bribed, at least that was the idea. Then why mark us both? He thought of the gang he'd run with years ago, the promises, the initiation that tasted like ash. He thought of what he'd done to survive. Because the map is incomplete with one half, she answered. Only together, only both halves does it show the path. Together you make the key. The desert wrapped them in its cold fingers as dawn threatened, and the drifter understood the shape of the choice that lay ahead. He could turn and run into a life of small, forgettable crimes, or he could follow the brand, a humiliating, dangerous truth, and find what had been hidden in the sand for reasons that might make the world better or worse. They were not given space for moral philosophy. Outlaws and corrupt men do not wait for conscience. They were given only the long road and the fact that everything important had been set in motion. The brand had awakened. The hunters had fled, but men who want certain things don't stop because flames stop. They adapt, regroup, and press on. He raised his head and saw beyond the moon-silvered dunes, the silhouette of ancient stones bunched and black against the skyline like teeth. The woman let out a sound that was half prayer and half resignation. The ruins, she said. They're calling. He strapped his coat, felt the familiar purchase of tools and weapons under leather, and for the first time since he remembered running, took the step toward a destiny he had not chosen. His life, once a quiet ledger of avoided trouble, had been written over. The brand was no longer a private scar. It was a map and a promise, and it had the weight of men willing to die for what it led to. They rode toward the ruins as the first light burned the eastern horizon like a secret revealed. Behind them, the scorched circle in the sand cooled to black glass. Ahead of them, the desert waited, a vast ledger ready to be read. They had become, together, a problem that would drag the past into the present, unfold conspiracies beneath the sun, and call to things that had slept under sand long enough. By the time the town was a blurred memory, both of them knew the same hard truth. The brand had chosen them, and in the choosing it had made them both prey and key. The desert does not accept neutrality. It forces decisions. And the choices they now made would shape not only who survived the next day, but who might own the secret buried beneath the dunes for all time.